I want to pass it on to David Mangini to talk about how central bank digital currency enhances the role for Mojaloop in developing economies. Take it away, David.
Very good. Thank you. We've had some great presentations already today, so I've got to catch up here with the level of color and energy that's been in all of these presentations today. It's great. I can certainly let you know that the presentation I've got today is going to have more color in it than yesterday, so that'll be good. And we'll share this screen. I'm also just going to take a moment to be sure that I've got myself set up where I can also be reading the comments as they come in. So I'm just going to be sure that I take a minute and find where I'm going to do that. If you just give me one extra moment. Yeah, this is bizarre. I can't seem to get myself set up the way I want. All right, somebody please let me know if there are comments in the chat, because the way Zoom is presenting this to me, I don't see the chat. So someone please let me know about that. I'll go to full screen here.
Yeah, we'll pop in, David, and let you know if there's questions that come in.
Oh, great. It'll take, just takes my laptop a moment or two to get in here. Are you seeing my screen?
Not yet, David.
Okay, then.
We can see the presentation mode. Do you want to swap displays?
You're seeing my presentation mode.
Yeah, the speaker variant. You just need to switch screens.
Okay.
That's at the top, should be top left of your screen. There's an X button, information button, and the next icon there at the top right of your screen.
Top right of my screen, I've got a more button.
No, top left.
Top left, I've got a mute button.
Top left.
Come on, this worked yesterday. Take it away. Let me, Catherine, if you can sort it out, go ahead.
David, there we go. Now you're good to go.
Are we all set up correctly now?
Yes, we are.
Oh, great. I really apologize for that. That's awful. Okay. So what I want to do here, I'm going to talk to you about CBDC. And this is something we've talked about before, but I really want to explain the benefit that I think we gain and that Mojaloop gains by being able to bring together CBDC with the kind of interoperability that Mojaloop provides. For me, this is very, very key to why I have wanted to participate with Mojaloop. This is one of the reasons I've really encouraged that the company that I'm representing, Glori Digital, become a member here and support the efforts. You're putting in place interoperability, which is by far the most powerful way that a central bank can then come along and add their currency into the community and extend it to the users. And so that's really kind of what I want to really bring across is how these come together and how they work together. So let me do that. Now, as I say, I'm representing Giori Digital, and I want to just give a moment to explain the background that we have in this space. This company was set up by a gentleman named Roberto Giori, a Swiss citizen who has a long legacy in the business of banknotes. So the whole Giori family, from his father to his grandfather, had been involved in the printing business. His grandfather was printing things like stock certificates and stamps, postage stamps from printing plants in Italy. many, many years ago, but about 70 years ago, the business turned towards the production of secure banknotes. So in combination with companies that provide the ink and the machinery to do the actual printing, you ended up here with a business that has dominated worldwide to print 98% of all the banknotes in the world. So it comes from that legacy of working with all the central banks around the world that print banknotes. And not all of them do. There's many, many countries where their banknotes are printed by contract. And so that's still using this same technology, these same machines, all of that. They just don't have the print works within the country. So coming out of that legacy of printing banknotes, Giori looked at this and said, in the digital world, you still have physical cash. And how do you bridge that? How do you take what has circulated as banknotes, dematerialize it, find a way to make that a digital banknote? And this is an effort that he began around 2011, 2012. And he formed a new company to address that, which has grown into Glori Digital. And the solution that Glori Digital provides is this notion of a digital banknote. So now we call it CBDC. We didn't call it that as things were getting started. I've been associated with this effort since about 2014. So what are we doing? We're producing something that is as close to cash as you can find in a digital form. I showed this money flower yesterday from the BIS, and this kind of shows different forms of central bank money. Some of it offered wholesale only for interbank settlement. That's a wholesale CBDC. And some of it is for general purpose. And I put this little GSMT logo right in the middle of the diagram. In that little space of the Venn diagram is where the solution that we provide sits, closest to cash. It is in the area of all four of these characteristics. It is digital. It is issued by the central bank. It is widely accessible for anyone to use, and it is token-based. So I'll give a little more of an explanation about what CBDC is. You'll see me use this term GSMT, and it's spelled out here on the page. It is Global Solutions for Money Technology. It's just the name of the CBDC solution that they have here. So CBDC has to be distinguished between the kind of digital currencies that are limited to only be used with central bank reserves to settle between banks and the central bank. And so on red here, the wholesale CBDC is restricted, really. There's limited participants. The only participants in that are the counterparties of the central bank. They're generally commercial banks. In some countries, they allow a few other participants. And it just works with, I mean, this exists today. This kind of wholesale CBDC is nothing new. What's new is what's here in green, which is a retail CBDC, a general purpose currency issued from the central bank that is extended all the way to the user. We have licensed institutions, commercial banks, other payment providers that are in the middle as really a distribution point for the digital currency. You know, this is set up pretty much the way things are set up today. You have banks today that distribute banknotes. They come through the banks, they come through ATM machines. So there's, even in today's model, you have these licensed institutions that participate in, and this is kind of called a two-tier model, where you have the central bank issuing, you have a second tier of institutions that distribute the currency out to the public. So we're going to talk about retail CBDC mostly, and where Mojaloop plays is that final connection on the right-hand side that says, hey, get it to the user. How do you extend this into the whole rest of the payment ecosystem? So I'll talk mostly about that. We'll talk a little bit about the wholesale CBDC. Most central banks around the world have really picked up on this topic of central bank digital currencies. It's become a very, very active topic. And like I mentioned yesterday, when you really look at some of the other actions that have been happening from Libra, Project Libra, now called Diem, you have a lot of attention brought back to what is the role of sovereign issued currency? What is the role of private issued currency? And how do the two coexist? And really, a lot of the countries around the world have already jumped into this and have been studying it for some time. But in the central bank community, as you know, as well as I do, this is a very slow process and very deliberate and very diligent, very comprehensive as they go through it. So the BIS has been tracking this kind of activity. The Bank of International Settlements has had surveys 2019 in January, again in 2020 in January, where they make an assessment of what's happening for the world in this topic. So we see that about 70% or so of the central banks have said, yes, they're engaged in some kind of CBDC work. And this is across the board. These are not just advanced countries. These are also a lot of developing countries that have already engaged on this. And then the focus of that work, 31% of them are specifically looking at a retail CBDC, and 13% have limited their work on a wholesale CBDC. So, and you've got 56% that really are engaged to study both. So very active topic. It's in the works. It will happen eventually. It will happen. So the first place that CBDC was really targeted was in wholesale. It is easier to do. You have a limited set of participants. You have full control over the entire system, the entire process. And as central banks wanted to experiment around the idea of how do we make this, how would it work? How does it relate to policy? How does it support the monetary policy that we have? In all of these ways, working with a wholesale CBDC just makes everything much more manageable when you're first setting out to explore something like this. So going back to 2016, there were some early projects. Jasper here, the Bank of Canada, had one of the first banks to really say, okay, let's try this out. There have been a lot of analysis, a lot of studies. They set up a test lab for Canada where they wanted to see if we use distributed ledger kind of technology, if we use this blockchain technology, how might it apply for wholesale CBDC? They worked with some companies like R3 Corda was a platform they were using for this. And so they set up a three-stage project in cooperation with Singapore, Monetary Authority of Singapore, and progress through different use cases, progress through the role of different institutions in doing this. This is different from the kind of blockchains that had existed before then, which a lot of those, like Bitcoin, were a proof of work kind of concept. They were decentralized. They didn't have the same kind of governance. They were taking up enormous volumes of energy and taking extraordinarily long times to finalize transactions. And so there were these kinds of problems they wanted to address, do it differently. They got away from proof of work as the consensus model. They put full control back in a centralized model. These became permissioned blockchains, so that very limited, very strict governance around who's going to participate and what role they're going to play. They had notaries, which is a role in the blockchain that is the final sign-off authority on what is accepted as valid. So this new kind of structure was really what they wanted to test and put in place. And they did that initially within Canada, just among the institutions in Canada to do that with Jasper 1, Jasper 2. At the same time, Singapore was doing that in a project called UBIN, also using Corda. And then in 2018, in phase 3 of both projects, they said, well, how can we link these together? Is there a way that this can link together? So they had the project Jasper Uben. You know, the initial outcomes of these projects were interesting. They concluded, well, you know what, this works. Yes, you can use a distributed ledger. You can use a blockchain to link these organizations together and settle transactions. It doesn't give you a tremendous cost savings. It doesn't really even give you tremendous improvements in efficiency. It works, but it more or less feels like we've solved the same problem, but just with different technology. You know, we substituted one kind of database alignment structure with a different kind. And so it feels like, yeah, it works, but it wasn't like this is just revolutionary. Nobody had the feeling this was revolutionary. In a similar way, there were projects going on for some other countries during the same period of time. Europe and so the European Central Bank, Japan, Bank of Japan had this project called Stella that they progressed through 3 stages. You also had the Emirates and Saudi Arabia in 2019 publicized their program for Aber. South Africa had one in 2018. Thailand, you see it here, Infanon, as well as Switzerland, which in December just put out a report about Helvetia, which was recently published. So in all of these cases, the focus is wholesale. The focus is how do we align the counterparty institutions with the central bank? This is all using reserve funds, reserve capital. That, though, taught the industry an enormous amount. One thing it really taught the industry is you can harvest this kind of blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology can be used. And over this period of time, that technology began to mature more. It began to fall into place. And most importantly, you had really an increase in the skill level available in the industry. You had engineers all over the world who jumped into this, saw this as a growth area, and put their expertise and their talent on doing this. So now you've got a pool of talent around the world that you can draw on, and that was significant for the whole industry. So projects get underway. Once this starts moving, it keeps moving. The IMF has tracked the projects that are happening around the world, and you see here on this map, there are a variety of different status. You know, some are completed projects that were successful. And I'm going to talk about one of those at the end, which was Uruguay in South America. That is a program that Glori Digital did. And it was the use of GSMT in a market trial in 2017 into 2018, which was with the Central Bank of Uruguay. There were also some other experiments. There was a project in 2014 in Ecuador with the Central Bank of Ecuador that ended in 2018. That was not so successful. Ecuador is a little unique that they don't print their own money at all. They use the dollar. So they are a fully dollarized country along with El Salvador and Panama. But what they are doing instead is they did work with a retail CBDC as a pilot. And then you have some other very notable programs around. The ones that really get the most attention are the projects that have occurred in Sweden and still ongoing, in South Africa, still ongoing, and China, which launched their pilot last year, very significant pilot. There's also South Korea and a few others. So lots of activity going on. Almost everywhere else, you have at least some degree of study. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve with a retail CBDC? And here, the issue is that, as I mentioned before, in a digital environment, you have a lot of different kinds of private money that are meeting different needs. And you have private money that's being issued from commercial banks, you've got private money issued from MNOs, the mobile operators. And in every case, you're using money that is a liability of whatever institution issued it. But they grow in adoption, and when they are reliable, they carry a lot of impact in the economy. In countries that have deposit insurance, using bank money, and by that I mean money that might be in a checking account, a savings account, a debit card, or a credit card, that kind of money feels very, very safe. If there's deposit insurance operating in a country, users don't think twice, and they feel as though that money is, I don't need digital cash. This money always works. We have multiple networks. So we have a Visa network that's independent of the MasterCard network. So from a market infrastructure point of view, there's some redundancy. If some crazy reason the Visa network goes down, people can switch to a MasterCard in those countries that's available. Unfortunately, of course, there's many places in the world without that capability. And so for developing countries and countries with larger numbers of unbanked, the idea of a central bank digital currency has much, much more meaning. It is a safer form of money since it's issued from the central bank. It is not dependent on the solvency of the issuing institution. And so there's other benefits. But if you take it from the point of view of the central bank, what is the problem the central bank is trying to solve? We've got that here. The central bank cares about monetary policy. They have a mandate, and they want to fulfill that mandate, which generally includes providing a currency of exchange for the population. It also generally includes maintaining a safe and efficient payment system. But there is monetary policy. CBDC is M0. It's in the money base. And so it is under the control of the central bank. Also, social, financial inclusion is enormous as a motivator for many, many countries. So is trying to put limits and try to get more control over things like tax evasion and corruption. So for a lot of countries, from the point of view of the central bank, there are many, many advantages to be able to have more efficient tax enforcement. To be able to deliver more of the currency directly to the user and less of it lost through corruption. Also for security, the safety of the payments, and for sovereign control. There are actually some countries in the world that are a bit concerned about the fact that 98% of the credit card market processing is done by 3 American companies and 1 Chinese company. It's either MasterCard, Visa, American Express, or UnionPay. And there are many countries around the world that feel as though having your retail economy riding on the businesses of foreign interests like that is an issue to be addressed. That's not the concern in the countries where you have developing economies. But what I have learned, what I have seen, is every country has a different motivation here. Many, many countries have a motivation of financial inclusion, but their circumstances are different. They either have a very large economy happening next door in the next country, or they're part of a regional setup, perhaps a monetary union. So every country's got a different issue here. If I look at how this whole ecosystem connects together, you've got the governments, you have the banks, the merchants, the users. On a retail CBDC, all parts of this come together. CBDC really sits under the column of the governments. It's the primary thing here is the governments have the exclusive authority to issue a legal tender currency. And they also really have that control point for the life cycle of that currency. So in the context of Mojaloop, we've all and the projects already underway, like Tanzania, really show that the government uses Mojaloop to deliver payments to citizens. CBDC enters the picture because what the governments could be doing, which they don't do yet, is they could be using legal tender cash to distribute electronically directly to users, rather than funding other institutions to make payments to the users. They could issue the currency directly to the user. And that's what the goal is. So as we look at how the central banks and the governments benefit from inclusive real-time payment systems, all of these things that Mojaloop has had in the marketing materials all apply. And I highlighted the last one here, which is to say, using fiat currency or a digital CBDC that's guaranteed and also controlled by the central bank is another benefit here that comes along with this. So a big part of what I'm interested in sharing with you here as well is how does CBDC connect with the ecosystem? So as Mojaloop defines this, the goals here with Mojaloop is, as we've said before, inclusive and open payment system rails that drive an ecosystem's growth. CBDC fits this very, very well. You divide this between the collaboration space and the competition space. And really, most of these central banks look at CBDC as something that is part of the market infrastructure. It's part of that collaboration space. It's part of the rails of delivering payments. It is not seen as a service offering from private parties. It's seen as a social good. So in the same way that Mojaloop is there to try to provide the support around the regulation, the governance framework, and the rails, CBDC kind of fits in that category. Now, there are competitive capabilities that digital currency is going to provide in the private sector as well. A big part of what we do is really try to balance what are the functions that are going to happen in the public sector, what are the functions that are going to happen in the private sector, and what is the governance and the regulatory supervision that connects it all together. That's a big part of what the CBDC studies are really all about. If we look a bit at the markets, we focus very much in Glori Digital around social improvement. It's basically a real strong philosophy of this particular company that I'm supporting with this, in that they really, Mr. Giori, as well as the founder, traveled the world to put printing plants in all over Africa, all over the Middle East, all over Southeast Asia, and looking at the conditions in these countries. He also understood firsthand the incredible difficulty of just distributing banknotes through a lot of different countries. A lot of island nations face the challenge of putting banknotes on boats 2 times a day to distribute to islands. Other countries with remote villages face a lot of those same challenges. So having a solution that can be delivered through other infrastructure like a mobile phone is enormously powerful, and really is the same benefit that all these other mobile money financial inclusion programs from M-Pesa on forward have also tried to put in place. The difference here is you're doing the same thing. You're delivering money to a user. You're doing it through their mobile phone. You need all the same interconnectivity and interoperability that Mojaloop provides. The difference is it's legal tender and it's from the central bank. And that is the primary benefit to what we're really doing with this. Helping the underserved for financial access. This is a chart well known to this community already. What we did is we look at, okay, if we extend this worldwide, what does it look like? And the pattern really remains largely the same. 66% of the unbanked all over the world have mobile phone access. And for making payments, you don't need anything fancy. You don't need a smartphone. You can do this with a regular feature phone using USSD channels for communication. You can do SMS. If you have a smartphone, you can have an app that controls the payments, but it's wide open for capability. There are large populations all over the world. More than 80% of transactions, of course, as an average around the world, are still done in cash. There is a lack of local services from commercial banks. These funds are safer. They can circulate through a larger portion of the population, which actually does have the effect to increase GDP by a very small amount. And not insignificantly, over time, if CBDC is adopted, it's going to eventually reduce the volume of banknotes and coins. We're not in the business of putting cash out of business. We're not trying to eliminate cash. We're trying to offer an alternative. It's going to circulate side by side with cash. But over time, 10 years, it'll have a knock-on effect where it reduces the volume of banknotes. And that has a tremendous beneficial impact. The reduction of the production of cotton and paper, the reduction of the inks. In addition, when you talk about the metals for the coins, there's a lot of environmental impact there as well. If we look specifically at the use case in Sub-Saharan Africa, 235 million unbanked people there receive their farm pay in cash, of course. This is where this kind of CBDC is going to make a tremendous impact, has the potential to do that. Mojaloop is an extremely valuable enabler so that the central bank has a way of getting it distributed through the population. We look at the market for CBDC all over, from small, very, very small countries, small, medium, large, very large, and you know, it can apply everywhere. It applies better in some places than others. We have visited and had discussions with 80 central banks around the world in developing countries as well as in advanced economies. We focus here, where this is shown in blue, the focus on financial inclusion, the focus for the higher unbanked areas, focuses where there are lower levels of the United Nations Human Development Index as ways to identify where this can provide the greatest social good. When I talk about CBDC, there are several different approaches to it. It isn't just about blockchain. It's not just about distributed ledgers. There are other traditional technologies. The solution that this company produces, called GSMT, is not a blockchain. It is not open source. It is a proprietary solution. It represents banknotes individually in a digital form. It circulates side by side with traditional banknotes. And they're structured so that each digital token would be the equivalent of a banknote. Banknotes, as they circulate from any country, use a combination of different security features, either embedded in the substrate, the security threads and holograms and this kind of stuff, or in the printing technology, which produces optical variable ink or intaglio raised printing or micro printing at a micron level. Those kinds of security features exist for any banknote. They also exist in the digital equivalent. So there are controls in the digital token, which are shown, which are customizable actually, so that different central banks can decide the manner in which they want to protect their own currency. But in this concept, not being a blockchain, what Glori Digital does is produce this kind of what's called an e-note to correspond with what normally would have been a printed banknote. And these e-notes are each individually serialized. They're each individually signed by the central bank. They're fungible. One is as good as another. They're verifiable, and they're persistent. Now, there's really a difference here with this kind of digital token than from what is normally spoken about in cryptocurrencies and this sort of thing. The tremendous focus in a cryptocurrency or on other digital currencies is validating the transactions that happen. You record the transactions that occurred. The validity of the next transaction is linked to the validity of the previous transactions. And all of the integrity is built around the transaction. Is the transaction verifiable? Here, it's the opposite. The integrity is based on this digital element. Is this e-note intact? Has it been manipulated? Has it been modified? Is there anything that, is this element, wherever it exists, is that element whole and undisturbed? So the focus here is the integrity is the element. If this digital token is in your wallet, you own it. If it comes out of your wallet and goes to someone else's wallet, they own it. Wherever this thing exists, it's a bearer instrument. Wherever it is, that's where the value is. And so we, of course, it's a digital system. We record the transactions. But what's even more important is the integrity of the token itself. So the token passes through, the system we set up is in three pieces. There is a platform at the central bank, and most of these digital currency CBDC systems are set up like this with three pieces. So you've got a piece at the central bank, and the whole purpose there is to generate and issue the digital currency. We call them e-notes. The platform in the middle, which exists at licensed institutions, that's the platform where you circulate the currency and where you manage the wallets. And that institution faces the user. The customers are customers of that institution. Very rarely would we expect a central bank to offer service directly to the public. They're not set up for that. They don't have the support. They don't have what they need. What we're really expecting here, and the model most countries are going to focus on, is they'll use the existing ecosystem as much as possible. Payment institutions, you don't have to be a commercial bank to offer the service. You need to be a payment provider. You're not offering credit. You're not even paying interest on whatever is in your wallet. You're holding banknotes, so you're not paying interest. And you're not offering credit. So it's a different kind of license. It's a payment service provider in the regulatory structure. So the central banks will rely on these institutions to serve the needs of the public. The business model for these institutions is different approaches. Because it's a social good, the governments would prefer that there not be a per transaction fee on this, the way you have with mobile money payments under certain circumstances. When you cash out, you got to pay a commission on that. You've got a lot of different ways you could set up the business model as that operator, but I think the central banks would prefer that it not be done as a per transaction fee. But that institution is providing a service. They're maintaining your wallet and they're serving your needs to offer this service. So there's other ways to set that up. The third piece on the far right-hand side is the idea is you want to interoperate with any part of the ecosystem. Our company's producing an app for a smartphone that just simply makes it possible so that if you don't have some other way of doing it, at least you have something. But it's not necessary to have that third part provided by our company. The idea is through the APIs of the distribution platform, you connect into Mojaloop, and I'm going to show you that soon. In different countries, this is probably going to be set up in different ways. The central bank, this one-tier idea where the central bank provides everything all the way to the user, doubt very much we'll see much of that, maybe in one or two very, very small countries. The middle model is where the central bank would own, maybe operate both platforms, leaving the private institutions to only provide a payment system. I think what's going to be most likely is what you find at the bottom, the last choice, which is the central bank's going to concern itself with what they do today and issuing a currency, and then leave it to the private institutions to circulate it, distribute it, work with the users, provide the payment ecosystem. Should all be done in the private sector. But this boundary between public sector, private sector is significant from the regulatory point of view. Key in this, and I mentioned it before, is wherever this e-note sits is where the ownership exists. So as these e-notes are generated, in the top line here, where these e-notes are generated at the central bank, they're stored in a reserve, and they are on the balance sheet. The value of that money is on the balance sheet of the central bank at that moment. When it's moved from the central bank to some institution that's providing the service, they're first brought into that institution's balance sheet. They're brought into a safe, digital safe, and held by that institution until they are distributed. While they're held, they are a liability, they are on the balance sheet of that institution. They bought those banknotes from the central bank. This is exactly the same way it happens with banknotes. The third step, when those e-notes are distributed to a user wallet, they're now owned by the user. And even if the wallet is in a platform run by the CBDC operator, it's still owned by the user if it's in the user's wallet. It's like having a safe box at the bank, and your instrument, whatever's in that box, you own, but the bank is holding it for you. So it's a repository relationship. There is a significant difference, though, that I do want to highlight because it applies very directly with how you connect CBDC to Mojaloop. Not all money is the same. The fact that central bank money, legal tender, is issued from the central bank, it remains a liability of the central bank. If you're holding cash, you have a claim on the central bank. If you deposit, quote unquote, deposit that money in a commercial bank, you are exchanging your claim for the central bank into a claim on that commercial bank institution. You're accepting that you'll relinquish your claim on the central bank by handing over your banknotes, and you will accept a claim on the commercial institution for having a balance in an account that they maintain for you. But the balance in that account they're maintaining is just a liability. It's your claim against that institution. The two can never mix. You either have a claim on the central bank, or you have a claim on a commercial institution or an MNO. Those monies cannot exist in the same wallet at the same time. They're independent legal claims. And so this has an impact when you want to use a platform like Mojaloop to connect for interoperability. You have to manage the separation of these kinds of currencies. And the third one that can be present is a foreign CBDC. Since these are all digital, they are very likely to all exist in the same domain at the same time. So you've got foreign CBDCs that may exist in a market that are being issued by a country elsewhere, and they're a claim on some foreign central bank. You've got central bank money coming domestically, issued by this central bank, and you've got private money floating in there in between with some MNO that's offering a currency, but they have they're supposed to have an adequate guarantee account to back up the money that's in circulation through the mobile network. You have to kind of balance these three. You have to keep track of these three. They got to be separated. And it gets really tricky if you have a foreign CBDC like the Chinese renminbi that's in digital form, that's in your market. And what impact does that have on economic policy within your own market? And what does that do to exchange rates? So that foreign CBDC is going to only be convertible through foreign exchange. Okay, so let me focus more here on how does this work with Mojaloop. So Mojaloop is in the best possible position to be the value hub that provides connectivity between different payment systems and to provide interoperability across institutions, across payment networks. As I mentioned yesterday, I think we could look into the future and perhaps see that Mojaloop may take even a larger role where you can pass currencies cross-border, same money, same currency, different countries, or perhaps even further in the future where there's an element of foreign exchange involved and you can do cross-border payments through systems like Mojaloop. That's for another community meeting. But here, today, right now, in places like Tanzania, where you're already providing connection between different financial institutions with the involvement of the central bank, the only thing that's missing is the central bank hasn't said, okay, we're going to add our own currency to the mix. But if they were to do that, you have to go through this exchange process. You can't mix the monies together. So I've got two financial service providers, A and B. The one on the right, financial service provider B for Bob, is traditional ledger-based payment system. It could be an M&O that's offering a mobile payment service, and so they're circulating a private currency to do that. Financial service provider A could be doing the same thing, and so Alice might also have a mobile money system that Mojaloop is providing the interoperability between. It could be between Orange and MTN. It could be, two different countries of MTN. It could be all kinds of combinations. But once you introduce CBDC into it, you have to make an exchange of different monies of the same currency. So Alice's financial institution is going to have to take her e-notes, which are issued from a central bank, and exchange that for the money that's going to settle through Mojaloop. So they would have to take the e-notes that come from Alice, the CBDC, and essentially make a deposit into an account. And then the balance of that account is handled through settlement. CBDC has no settlement if it's done in the way I've been talking about it today. If it is a digital element that's a bearer instrument that moves from one wallet to another, when the value moves, you're done. There's no settlement. When you do a transaction with CBDC and Alice sends to Bob, if they're both on CBDC, the e-note moves, you get the notification back, confirmed, done, boom, finished, finality. There is no settlement. You get your money instantly. Here, if it's using a ledger structure, the way mobile payments are done today, what Mojaloop is designed to support and settle, you've got that traditional system has to be respected. You have to interface to that ecosystem. That has to happen at some point here between CBDC and the rest of the ecosystem. In this case, in the red area, I have that happening within financial service provider A. Okay, I hope that's clear. Be happy to answer a question about it if there's any. So what's the impact of using CBDC? In summary here, it's a safer form of funds than using private money. It's issued from the central bank. It's a liability on the central bank. Generally, not every country, a lot of countries, there would be greater trust in the central bank. CBDC allows immediate and direct disbursement of social benefit payments to the public. If you have that situation where the central bank wants to institute a policy of direct payment, like has happened often enough, here's a means where the payments can be made directly to the user, instant settlement, instant delivery. CBDC can benefit from the interoperability. I mean, Mojaloop opens the door for this. You know, what a lot of countries are faced with is, yeah, I want to issue a digital currency. How is it going to interact with the rest of the ecosystem? So Mojaloop is a great enabler that allows that to happen. Users can access CBDC through existing mobile devices. I'm not going to get into the details around that, but essentially all you're asking the mobile phone to do is issue payment instructions. This is who I am. This is who I want to give money to. Here's the amount of money I want to give. That's all the mobile phone has to handle. And you can handle that very, very easily without having a smartphone, without needing an app. You don't need anything special. It can work with the existing ecosystem. It reduces the need also for the capital that mobile operators have to post to guarantee the private money that they're using. So there are a lot of other issues around CBDC that that the central banks try to address, that they're trying to figure out, well, how do we solve these kinds of issues about know your customer, money laundering, the things, kind of the regulations that I was talking about yesterday are a big part of this, because you're in a difficult situation where banknotes are anonymous. They're great for money laundering, fantastic for the illegal market. The central banks want to change that, but that's changing a major assumption about cash. The privacy of cash cannot be the same when it's digital. There's different regulatory solutions to try to make that a little better. If you say, okay, I'm going to limit you to an extremely small amount of money in a wallet, and I'm going to limit your wallet to a very, very low amount, just so you have a little bit of cash flow. Regulatory-wise, you could exempt that from KYC if you chose to. You could make a regulatory solution to something like that, so you can provide anonymity and privacy for a very, very limited use wallet. But anything beyond that, you're into the digital world of being able to provide KYC and all that. In the middle of all this, there's a lot of moving parts. You have open banking, you have the PSD2 kinds of regulations that are happening. You have a lot of issues around custodianship of the wallet. So there's a lot of regulations and policy issues for governments to try to address. As I close out, I do want to just mention, this has been done. This works. We did it in Uruguay, 2017 into 2018. We delivered our GSMT solution to Banco Central del Uruguay. They issued legal tender pesos. It was called the e-peso. They issued it. It was available for the public to use. It was distributed through the mobile operator in the country with a mobile payment system called InSwitch. It went to merchants. It went to the payment provider, Red Pagos, which offers payment networks across the country. It was used for person-to-person. IBM was our hosting partner. We're not an operator. We're a software vendor. We don't operate this system. And so we were working with IBM in Uruguay. They hosted it at their data center in Montevideo, and we brought all the pieces together. So that's my story on this. CBDC is coming along. It's slow. I expect we'll probably find more uses of this coming up in, well, as soon as the coronavirus allows the central banks to start operating in a more normal way again. So probably in the next couple of years. There we have it. Thank you very much. I am sorry I wasn't able to see the comments as we went along, but I can answer any quick questions.
Thanks so much, David. I will encourage everybody to post their questions on our community forums on Discourse there. so that we can catch up with the next session.